What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. Now we're going to take a look at another clip from Iain Dales LBC show last night, where he was discussing Boris Johnson's claims the EU is not likely to compromise on a deal due to the opposition in Parliament towards Brexit. And of course, Iain is still banging on about Boris Johnson using the term collaborator during the first ever People's PMQs yesterday. But unlike my last video, we are going to go over some of the viewers' calls into the show discussing these topics, the left-leaning Ramona antics, and Brexit in general. The first caller we're going to hear from is Paul from Brecon.
Asking, is Boris Johnson right that the EU have become less willing to compromise on a new deal because of the opposition to Brexit in Parliament? I think he is right on that. Is he right to use the word collaboration in this context? I don't think he is right to use that word because of the historical context of that word. Paul is in Brecon. Hello, Paul.
Hi. Well, first of all, I think he's totally right on the undermining. And funny enough, the Hammond and Co. sort of drive is actually increasing the likelihood of a no-deal Brexit.
Indeed.
The second point there, and I'll come to the word in a minute, semantics in a minute, but the second point is the EU, before March, did say one of their contingency plans was to carry on for 9 months after a no-deal, to carry on for 9 months, trading both ways, as if we normally do while we sorted things out. And I think that's extremely likely. But one thing is absolutely certain, with the chance of Parliament defeating Boris and stopping it altogether, in effect cancelling Article 50, they are going to hold on. And, you know, the Barnier did say that we've given Britain such a bad deal that no sensible country would want to do anything else but remain in. I mean, so they are very conscious it was a very bad deal, a no deal. So, I mean, Boris is totally right. Now, as regards the semantics of it, I actually think the left have been using the word Nazi and all these sort of things an awful lot. The other side's been using the word traitor, and both are wrong. Both are wrong. But I think collaboration is fair enough, actually, so I disagree with you on that. But I do agree, you know, when people are called traitors and all they've done is stand up for their principles, etc., that's very, very wrong. But most of this bad language is coming from the left. Anyone these days slightly to the right of Trotsky is termed extreme right.
Oh, no, I'm a fascist. I'm alt-right. I'm an extremist just because I believe that we should leave the EU.
Can I tell you a story about just happened to my son on this? The other night, he was in a pub, and two women came over to the table chatting. They weren't flirting, and they were chatting. They were going to politics. And my son had just appeared with Boris at our factory. And so the two boys came over, two men came over, who happened to be Channel 4 producers. And they got so vicious about it, about his being, if you like, to the right there. I mean, right by being a conservative type, that they actually ended up being chucked out the pub. That's how bad it got. And they were Channel 4 producers. So that's how extreme language is getting, and I think we have got to stop that. But I think Boris tends to use colourful language, and I think the way he's used that, I'll accept. But that is at the limit. I'd say that's the limit.
Well, look, what you just said about Channel 4 producers, you could have just said TV producers. I mean, obviously that's an anecdote. We've got your word for that. But I just think that when you think about how that word was used against British people in the Second World War who collaborated with the Nazis, that is really, I think, the main use of that word. Now, it is a perfectly respectable word in many ways, but that is how most people would interpret that. And I think to subliminally accuse Dominic Grieve, Philip Hammond, whoever else, of doing that kind of thing with the EU and just allowing people to draw the Nazi sort of conclusion, I just think is wrong. Now, I don't know whether Boris Johnson deliberately used that word to create division, or whether it was just something that slipped out. It could easily have been the latter. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on it, probably.
If he planned it, then it would be part of a campaign, was because, I mean, the chances are the only way they can stop it is if they take control in Parliament and then try to stop it, and then, actually even that, they've got to repeal Article 50, I think, to get rid of it. I think there's big complications there, so the chances are we may leave. But if they do succeed, I think there will be an election, and I think it will be people against Parliament.
Yeah, well, this all plays into that, doesn't it? You see, that's why, even though I want to give him the benefit of the doubt on it, there's a little voice in the back of my mind saying, well, it could have been deliberate. Paul, thank you.
So Paul thinks, as we all do, that Boris is right when he speaks about the Remona MPs undermining the UK's position regarding getting out of the EU, and how Philip Hammond and the rest of these Remonas are actually helping bring about a no-deal Brexit by actively going against the Prime Minister and making the EU think they hold some sort of power over us. So not only did Philip Hammond and Dominic Grieve vote for Article 50 and a no-deal Brexit, they are now trying to ensure it happens by attempting to block it, which then gives the EU a better hand and forces Boris Johnson to say, right, we go out on no deal then. I mean, actually, they're helping us. I'm sure Grieve was a lawyer before, if I remember rightly. How the fuck did he pass law school and be that stupid? Paul said something that I have heard before and might well be true regarding the EU allowing trade to flow almost as normal in the event of a no-deal Brexit for at least a few months, since it would be in their best interest to do so and hope a deal can be done in the meantime. It would be a common sense move for them if we left on WTO terms, as they will be in shit creek without a paddle, pointing out so long as the Remona's attempt to revoke Article 50 continues, the EU will hold on in the hope that we stay. So it's down to the government to make sure that that does not happen and we leave on WTO terms on the 31st of October. Paul then talks about reports Michel Barnier has said that he had given the UK such a bad trade deal to ensure that no other country would want to leave the bloc, which, if it's true, would not surprise me in the slightest. The EU is a protectionist racket that needs countries to fear leaving it, so the gravy train keeps on flowing and they can build their EU army to march along with their fake national anthem. Paul then talks about the rhetoric used in the Brexit debate, such as collaborator and traitor, reminding Iain that it's the rabid Ramoning leftist cumbuckets who run around calling people Nazis and shit like that. It's not Brexiteers doing this shit in 99.9% of cases. It's Ramonas who don't like the referendum result or the fact that 498 MPs voted to invoke Article 50 and give us no deal as the default. I do, however, disagree with Paul's opinion on why people are called traitors. It's not because they stand up for what they believe in, it's because they openly try to ignore the will of the British people that got them elected. Traitor is the only word for that in my opinion. No one is saying the average Remain voter is a traitor, as I've said in my last video. It's the vocal minority who run around doing this shit. The MPs in Parliament, the British media, and of course their Twitter echo chambers, who are the traitors. It's not the millions who voted Remain. Most of them accept the result and have moved on with their lives. I actually loved it though when he reaffirmed what we have all been saying for a while now, and the same is true in America. If you're not as far left as the Marxist fuckpigs, then you're a right-wing Nazi who hates everyone. Even Iain Dales agrees with that because, surprise, surprise, he's been called a fascist by the rabid leftist cumbuckets. Everyone's a Nazi unless you're a communist these days. Paul then tells us a story about a recent event to do with the PM's visit there involving Paul's son, who had appeared on TV with Boris Johnson at their factory, who was abused in the local pub so badly by two Channel 4 producers they actually got kicked out of the pub. Yet Boris Johnson is the devil because he calls the traitorous MPs in Parliament and the media collaborators. Fuck off, Iain. The media are not even impartial these days. I would say it's beyond obvious at this point. If producers are being chucked out of pubs for being vicious to local residents who appear on TV with the Prime Minister, then I would say nothing is out of bounds when it comes to calling out these people. Iain is not happy Paul stated it was Channel 4 producers, even though he likely knows Paul is telling the truth. He has to protect himself and LBC by distancing himself from it. Instead, he goes back to associating collaborations with the Nazis. When singers collaborate all the time, countries collaborate doing trade deals, which is negative to other countries who don't have the same trade deals, so it means fuck all at the end of the day. Dominic Grieve and Philip Hammond have consistently lied to the media and the public about many things and are actively trying to ignore something the public voted for because they didn't know what they were voting for when they invoked Article 50, or they've changed their minds now. They plan to collaborate with Labour and the Lib Dems and have openly admitted it. So why would they not collaborate with their friends in the EU to try and stop Brexit? Iain, you need to stop defending them. You're starting to sound really stupid now. Paul finished up talking about the facts around Remainers stopping a no-deal Brexit. They would have to take control of the order paper and repeal Article 50, since getting an extension would still mean no deal on the next date they get. So in the end, we are going to need a general election fought under the People versus Parliament motto, which I think would win hands down in that situation. Let's hope it don't get there. Let's move on to the next caller, who is Daniel from Epsom in Surrey.
Let's go to Daniel in Epsom. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, Ian. Do you know what? I think his language is absolutely fine. If you look at if you sit down and look at what's happened, we've had ex-prime ministers, we've had lords, a third of our own MPs all conspiring openly and directly with the EU against that legitimate vote that went through. So they've been doing it openly. I would love to have been a fly on the wall when Blair and Adonis and Grieve were all in Brussels. I would have done. I mean, Verhofstadt himself was campaigning with the Lib Dems. You had the EU funding the People's Vote, or the so-called People's Vote. They've been directly funding it. No one really talks about it.
What, you're accusing the EU of giving money to the People's Vote referendum campaign?
No, yeah, because they're funded by the best of Britain, and they're funded by the EU. That's how these things work. Go have a look yourself. Even Femi you had on the other night gets to use all their offices down by the river. It's kind of well known. What they'll stop at nothing.
I'm not sure. I don't think you're right on that. There's been a lot of discussion about
Katie Hopkins online. Go and look for yourself.
Well, do you know what? I'm not going to take Katie Hopkins' word for that. You may treat her as gospel. I'm not sure I'm going to on this. I think there are lots of questions to be asked about the funding of these groups. But you stated that as a fact, that they're being funded by the EU. I can't verify that now. And I think you're probably wrong on that, but I might have a little Google in a minute.
Well, Ian, it seems we have another person who disagrees with you about the collaborator line Boris used. Like me, he thinks Boris using this term is fine, especially when you take into account all that has happened in the last 3 years, with ex-prime ministers wading in against Brexit. John Major springs to mind, for instance, the former PM who prorogued Parliament to avoid an expenses scandal, that recently said he would take Boris Johnson to court if he tried to prorogue Parliament, in what is a Toe Swinson level of hypocrisy, along with unelected lords and 2/3 of the MPs in Parliament, even if their constituency they represent voted to leave the EU in 2016. All of these people are openly conspiring against the British public and their democratic decision to leave the undemocratic EU superstate. The caller Daniel talks about reports you won't see in the mainstream media that link the EU with funding these Remain groups in the UK, and how Verhofstadt was campaigning with the Lib Dems during the referendum campaign. Of course, Ian won't listen to that, and when Daniel brings up Katie Hopkins' name, Iain Dale tries to discredit him because she is not okay with the mainstream media, like Tommy Robinson or Sargon of Akkad. So their views or any research they might do is instantly discredited. How very impartial of you, Ian, you fucking snake. Be a man and admit what you know is likely to be the truth. Just because you don't like someone does not mean they have less credibility than anyone else. You yourself have preached understanding on this show when it comes to political debate. Yet a little while later, you show utter contempt for someone who used to have a show on the broadcaster you now work for, because you don't like them. That's some shitweasel behaviour right there, mate. Now let's move on to the final caller, who is Andrew from Halifax.
Andrew is in Halifax. Andrew, hello.
Good evening, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to say?
Well, I don't think... I think that Boris is right to condemn Hammond for his antics, and I don't think he's going too far in using the word collaborator. Teams in workplaces use the word collaborate and collaboration all the time.
Yeah, but that's in a positive way. He didn't mean it in a positive way, did he?
Well, there are all sorts of words you can either spin in a positive or a negative way. I mean, all I would say is that, compared to the things that I've said about Remainers over this last 3 years, if I was a Catholic, I'd have to go and do 1,000 Hail Marys for my atonement.
Shame on you then.
Well, it's what you're driven to by people that are not prepared to respect the democratic
In the end,
mandate.
Andrew, we've all got to live together after all this is over. And I think it will take so long for the country to come back together after this. And I said the other day that I think this subject will dominate our political debate for the rest of my life. But in the end, if we really want to live in a divided country for the next 10, 20, 30 years, then you go on ahead. You call these people traitors. You call them saboteurs. You call them collaborators. You call them what you will. And be very prepared for the kind of country we live in.
Well, that's fine, but there's no smoke without fire. They've begun this by, as I say, not respecting a mandate that they promised that they would abide by.
Well, then,
if you
fine.
want to heap the blame on them, not me.
No, I will heap the blame on you, because you can defeat people by the power of argument. You don't actually have to use these pejorative terms, they're worse than pejorative terms, to describe them, because it is not a crime to still believe that we should be in the EU. I don't believe that that's the right way forward for this country, but many people do. It's an entirely legitimate point of view. It is not something that anyone should be made to feel ashamed of.
Well, I'd agree with you, but I think you're changing the argument somewhat. It's not anti-democratic to believe that we should still be in the EU. What it is anti-democratic to do is to deliberately frustrate a referendum result that you'd promised you'd abide by, which is what most of the political class did and what most of the MPs were elected on.
And you're right. Well, fine. That's an easy argument to make. It's not a complicated argument to make. It doesn't need to be done in an abusive way. That's all I'm saying. Andrew, thank you very much.
Okay, so I take it you're all getting the gist of what people think about Boris using the term collaborators and how wrong Iain Dales' points are on this show, because for anyone who follows politics, it's clear to see the MPs and media are actively and openly working against the UK's best interests, and your listeners are trying to educate you on that fact. Iain, though, once again thinks because collaborations were used to describe traitors in World War II, that means any negative use of that word links it to the Nazis. How fucking stupid do you have to be for your mind to take you there when you hear that word? Do you need a safe space from it, Iain? Andrew points that fact out to him, saying lots of words can be both positive and negative. It still does not link them to the Nazis though, does it? It actually makes no sense why Iain Dales is actually trying to push this narrative. He is a Tory voter and a Brexit supporter, yet all these Brexiteers clearly don't agree with him. There is nothing to gain from moaning about the PM's use of a word, is there? Iain is really letting himself down here, in my opinion. When the first caller we heard said about the vile abuse his son receives at the hand of Channel 4's producers, he did not state they acted shamefully. He tried to brush off the claims. But when a Brexiteer listener says he had thrown out some abuse before at Remainers that wasn't very nice, Iain calls him shameful. Who the fuck do you think you are, mate? That is the second time this fuckpig has sat there and belittled what a viewer has said because he does not agree with it. First it was in relation to Katie Hopkins, and now this guy is shameful because he's not been kind to Remoaners. Iain plans to write a book called How to Be Nice to Each Other or some shit, and is sitting there doing this. I think he needs to read a book on how to be nice to everyone first, as he's still not mastered it yet, before he can write his own book telling other people how to do it. His absolute bias and utter contempt is clear to see when the conversation's about anyone he doesn't like. Iain then once again tries to insinuate the callers are talking about the average Remain voter on the street, when as you heard, they are all talking about the MPs who ignore the democratic mandate to get us out of the EU. Iain said you can beat their arguments, you don't need to abuse them. Clearly forgetting when someone brought up Katie Hopkins, he did not try to beat her argument, he just dismissed it because she had said it, showing he is willing to ignore the argument depending on who is making it. So don't talk shit, Iain. You're contradicting yourself like a Ramona now though, Iain, saying it's okay for people to wish we stayed in the EU, which, let me remind you, not one of your callers has said that it's not okay for them to think that. Their issue, once again, is with the MPs in Parliament who have ignored the will of the people. Why does this idiot even let listeners call in when he's clearly not listening to what they're saying? Andrew even has to point out the fact he's not talking about people who think we should stay in the EU. He's talking about the ones who are actively trying to block it. If you listened, Iain, you would have known that, and you would not look like such an arse right now. Of course, Iain is clearly forgetting the reason Boris said collaborators. It was in reference to a question about MPs working with the EU to stop Brexit, not the British public, you fucking idiot. I actually thought Iain Dales was better than this, but it looks like I was wrong. He acted like a complete fuckpig throughout these phone calls, treating the callers like shit and rubbishing their opinions because he did not like their opinion, or he didn't like who they was quoting. Not a very open-minded conversation, really, was it? Well, on that, I'm going to end the video there. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Remember to like, subscribe and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
And what was not debated in 2016 was the likelihood that we would end up leaving the EU with no deal.
And at the end of that 2 years, there is no guarantee that agreement will have been reached. But our exit would be automatic.
The electorate will have spoken. We will have to invoke Article 50. Once you invoke Article 50, It is a one-way street to the exit, which will happen in 2 years with no agreement of any kind at all, if necessary.
And what was not debated in 2016 was the likelihood that we would end up leaving the EU with no deal.